It is great to be here with you guys this morning. And as Pastor said, my name is Dana Harding. And how many of you guys are familiar with Ron Phillips Ministries, Hobbs House in Chattanooga? Well, that's where we're from, but we've been on vacation. This is my family down here. Stand up, guys. Yes, I am making you do this. This is Julie, Morgan, Bailey, and Maddie. And yes, it is me and the dog are the only guys in the house. I once had somebody who wanted me to take on some responsibility at church, and they wanted to give me like a position, but they were kind of hesitant on giving me the authority to actually do what needed to be done. And I said, look, I live with 4 women. I can stay home and not be listened to. You know, so you got that. You finally got that. Okay. As the social media director, it basically, you know, it sounds like a cooler position than it is. I sit in an office and I look at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram all day. So I am familiar with every cat video known to man and every political commentary. I can tell you frontwards and backwards, and I've seen some crazy stuff on social media. So now, for those of you that were kind of dreading coming this morning and hearing a guest preacher, you're off the hook because I'm not a preacher, okay? I don't make any bones about it. My father was a minister. My father was ex-military, and he was actually my dad was along in years when I came along. So my father is actually a World War II veteran. And and so my dad was in the military as soon as he got out of the military, which was about a year before I was born. He went back to work for the government, and did that while I was growing up. When I was about 10 years old, we were living in a little town called Lisbon, Maine, which is very similar to Mount Airy, except smaller. And when I was about 10 years old, my dad retired for the second time and decided he wanted to go into ministry. Felt like God was calling him into that. Probably less than a year later, he met the president of an international mission organization, and they hit it off fabulously. And the next thing we knew, my dad and my mom went on a trip, came home and said, "Oh, we're moving to Chattanooga, Tennessee." To which we were all like, "Huh? Where's that?" Moving at 12 years old was basically the furthest thing from my mind. But we did, and when I was 12, we moved to Chattanooga. I was your average American boy, man. I played sports. I took piano lessons at an early age, and you know, when all my friends would be outside playing, my mom would come to the door. "Dana, you need to come in and do your piano lessons," which I hated, you know, with a passion. You know, I'm sitting there going, you know, hammering on the piano for 30 minutes so I could go back out and play. But God put a seed there. And so when we moved to Tennessee, I got a little bit deeper into music, still played sports, and just, you know, average, you know, I was a Christian, got saved at an early age. Everything was normal. Until I was 16 years old. And one Sunday night when I was 16, my parents and I were on our way to church. We were hit head on by a person who was later shown to be on drugs. And the combined velocity of both cars was 90 miles an hour. My father died almost instantly of massive head and chest injuries. His heart exploded in his chest. My dad was about my size. The steering wheel was that far away from the seat. And instantly, my life changed. And, I'd always, I had all these great plans and all this stuff that I was going to do. And in a moment, the whole family was just turned on its ear. And my mom and I were actually not expected, we were actually not expected to live through the night. And we did, obviously, here. And when, in the aftermath of the accident, I moved around a little bit. I went to Southern California. I lived with my brother for a while. Moved back to Chattanooga, finished school. And I kind of, I kind of kept after the music thing. And by the age of 19, I was playing for a, Christian recording artist. I was, rubbing shoulders with, people like DeGarmo and Key and Larry Norman and Jesse Dixon and different people at different events we'd go to. And, life was pretty good. And as time went on, I started a business, I got married, and, life had its ups and downs. It was, average life. I mean, how many of you guys are on a high right now? Okay, I mean, in life things are going great. How many of you are on a low? I mean, we've all been there. And I made my share of mistakes along the way. And the problem with mistakes is you got two ways you can go with it. I was raised as an independent Baptist. Okay, independent Baptists, we were kind of like to the right of Southern Baptists. Okay. A lot of legalism, short hair, watch what you dress. It was, and my church wasn't as bad as some. My church was pretty relaxed. I mean, it was kind of a really strange dichotomy because, we'd hear there's no such thing as Christian rock. There's no such thing as, contemporary Christian music is wrong. And my Sunday school teacher is this long-haired hippie who listens to Randy Stonehill, I mean, so it was like, huh? But I made mistakes. I made my share of mistakes along the way. And the problem with the way I was raised is that, when I was in second grade, I went through my rebellion phase. Most people wait till they're teenagers, and go out and get in trouble and all that. I was like, I couldn't hurt anybody at that point, so I was pretty harmless. But I was like, when I get old, I'm not going to church. I'm going to sit at home and drink beer on Sundays, and well, my pastor preached this hellfire and brimstone sermon one Sunday at church, scared the daylights out of me. And so I was like, okay, God, I'm going to live for you, Well, that was kind of indicative of my whole life. It wasn't the love of God. It was the judgment of God that I was always looking over my shoulder. It was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. So fast forward substantially, because I can't cover 50 years in 40 minutes. 2005. My wife and I go on a trip to Israel. And while we were there, we met a guy who had gone to our church. And my wife has grown up at Central Baptist Church, Abba's house. I mean, she's been there since you were like, what, 4? 5. Since she was 5. Okay, so she's been there almost her entire life. I've been there now for 20-something years. Well, in 2005, we go on this trip. And in the course of the trip, there was a doctor on the trip named Dr. Hammond. And we really kind of hit it off. Really nice guy. He and his wife were on the trip. We were there with Brother Ron. I was shooting video. My wife was producing. We were doing some shows kind of on the fly while we were there. And I met Dr. Hammond. And in the course of conversation, I find out that Dr. Hammond is a TMJ specialist. deals with jaw dysfunction. And I'm like, well, that's cool. I don't need your help because I don't have TMJ. It's great. 8 months later, I'm having excruciating ear problems. Now, at this point, I'm a record producer. I own a recording studio. I'm a professional musician. I kind of need my ears. And it feels like constantly like somebody's just driving a screwdriver through my head, through my ear. So I'm kind of panicked. I go to this ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he says, you've got TMJ. Hey, I know a specialist. This is great. So I call up Dr. Hammond, and I said, hey, I just found out I have TMJ. Can I come see you? Oh, yeah, sure, come on down. So I go to his office, and I go through this basic, the tests, and they have to put all this goo in my mouth and make these impressions of my teeth and all this stuff for my jaw. Well, anyway, they go to take x-rays. And they take some x-rays, and the x-rays they look kind of weird, and they look kind of hazy, and he says, we need to change the angle. So he changes the angle of the camera, and I'm there with his assistant. She's taking the pictures, and we're talking, and she takes the x-rays and develops them and puts them up on that light board thing, and she just walks out of the room. And I'm going, okay, I'm sitting there waiting for the doctor to come back. He comes walking in, and he's like, okay, what do we got here? And he walks up to the screen, and he just stops. And he goes, you're a miracle. Okay, that wasn't what I was expecting to hear when I woke up that morning. So I was like, oh, do tell, And he said, we're done here. I'm going to have to send you for an MRI. And he's kind of stammering and not sure, and he's being real vague about everything. And he says, well, it looks like at some point in the past you might have broken your jaw, and it looks like, this is. I just don't want to say anything because let's just wait till we get the MRI back. And I'm like, okay. So I walk out the door, I get in my van, it started raining, and I'm like, figures. And I said, God, I am so sick of this. I'm so sick of this thing coming back to haunt me. Because the thing that he suggested was that in the accident that I was in with my father, that was what did it. Because I took a 90-mile-an-hour shot in the face. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And we were in a 79 Ford Fairmont station wagon, had a big steel bar in the back of the seat. And back in those days, they just pulled the upholstery over how many of you guys remember the old cars? They pull the upholstery over but there's no padding at all. So it's like, getting hit with an aluminum bat, Well, I went 90 miles an hour into that sucker. And I actually have retrograde amnesia from the accident. And I said, I'm tired of this coming back all the time. Because for years after my father's death, I became the poster boy for the anti-drinking and driving thing in the Chattanooga area. I would go speak at schools. I would be on television. I would be on radio shows. I was in the newspaper. I went and spoke one year at the state sheriff's conference. I'm a 20-year-old kid lecturing sheriffs from across the state on the dangers of drinking and driving. But at some point in my life, I wanted to move beyond that. I didn't want to be defined for the rest of my life by that moment. And I'm sitting there in my car, and I'm not one to say, I believe that God speaks to people. I really, honestly, I do. I know plenty of people, Brother Ron, Pastor Wes, other friends, that pastors that I know. But I've also seen, I've spent long enough in the church to have also seen a lot of abuse and manipulation. Because if God told me something, if God said it, then you can't argue with me. And so I'm very hesitant to ever say that God spoke to me. And I'll be honest with you, the times he has spoken for me, it's always been for me. It's always been him speaking to me to get me straightened out. And, how many of you guys know Ray Hughes? Ray's a friend of mine. And Ray put it great one time. He said, and if Ray said God said something, I'm going to listen, because Ray's on it. And Ray said one time, he said, I don't tell people God. He said, I say that very rarely because I'm a human being and I might be wrong, and I don't want to destroy somebody's faith and somebody's destiny because they think I had a word from the Lord and I just had a bad burger, I missed it. So I'm kind of like Ray in that respect. And I'm sitting there in my van, feeling sorry for myself, mad at God, and he showed up. And he said, told you I wouldn't put more on you than you can handle. And I said, yeah, well, this is pretty big. And he said, I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And if you know the story behind Jeremiah 29, they weren't in a great place. God speaks this thing to the children of Israel, and they're in captivity. They're under the thumb of the Babylonians. And he's going, hey, take wives, have families, grow crops, live your lives, because I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. So I'm sitting there in my van, and I said, all right. So the next day, I'm at home, and I get up, and I'm taking a shower, and the scripture comes to mind while I'm taking a shower, and it's, I will restore the years the locusts have eaten. It's in Joel. And I'm going, I will restore the years the locusts have eaten. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. And I'm thinking about this, and it's all just kind of running together. And I start thinking, that's Jeremiah 29:11. 29:11. 29:11. 29:11. 29:11. 29:11. 29:11. And I go, okay, if 11 is the verse and 9 is the chapter, then what would 20 be? Well, 20 would be the book of the Bible. I'm going, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And I go, and it's 20th chapter of the Bible is Proverbs. I don't know Proverbs 9:11. I'm not familiar with it. It's not one of your Sunday school favorites. Let me read it to you. So, I will restore to you the years. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong scripture. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. And I'm floored at this point. I mean, I'd gotten out of the shower, dried off, went and grabbed my Bible, and I read that verse, and I was like, oh my word. I mean, you talk about a rhema word. So a couple days later, Dr. Hammond calls me, and And his office calls me and he says, the MRI report has come back. You need to come see us. I said, okay, be right there. So, water break. So I go to his office and I walk in and they take me back and they put me in this room, in one of the exam rooms. And a few minutes later, he walks in. And he's got my MRI report in one hand, and he's got my x-rays in the other hand. And he walks up to me, and and there's a light table, like right in front of us. He just throws them on the table. And he goes, let me tell you something. He said, I have people come in this office all the time that are in excruciating pain. And I can't figure out what's wrong with them. He said, I know they're not faking, but they're in horrific pain. And I don't know how to help them because I can't tell what's wrong with them. Because it's not obvious from the x-rays and things like that. He said, your jaw is completely destroyed and I don't even know how you're even walking around. And the long and short of it is, when the accident happened, it broke my jaw. Now, I've spoken to people that have had broken jaws, and they said it is one of the most excruciating things you'll ever go through in your entire life. I had a friend who had his jaw broken in the Army. He said for a month afterwards, they had his jaw wired shut. He said, I could only get my teeth open enough to get a straw between my teeth. He said it was the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life. I walked around for 23 years with a broken jaw and didn't know it. Where your jawbone goes up into your head, it forms a socket right here. And, it forms a joint right here. Well, that bone broke off. The bone that was left, the part that was up in my skull, disintegrated completely, dissolved. The tendons and the ligaments came down and reattached to the existing bone and formed another joint to the side of it. And Dr. Hammond said, that is not possible. He said, I don't even know how to treat this. He said, you are the first person in recorded medical history with this condition. He said, I don't even know what to do with you. So he just kind of made it up as he went along, and it helped. The pain went away, and this side was having some issues because it was carrying the brunt of the load, so I went through treatment with him. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. So, fast forward a few years. 2012. I've still got my own business. I'm doing some stuff. I'm doing some. How many of you guys have ever heard the Centerpoint radio broadcast? Okay, Pastor has. Where have the rest of you been? I did all this work. No, I'm just kidding. I was a contractor for years with Ron Phillips Ministries before I was actually on staff, and I produced the Centerpoint radio broadcast, which was a daily 13.5-minute devotional program that Pastor Ron did. And so I had my studio, I'm at home, Julie's gone to work, the girls have gone to school. I take a shower, get out of the shower, I get dressed, I'm about to brush my teeth, and all of a sudden it felt like somebody just went and reached into my chest and just grabbed my heart and just started squeezing it. And I was going, well, that's different. And so as any intelligent man would do, I blew it off. I went to the kitchen, I'm doing stuff in the kitchen, and then I start feeling like I'm going to pass out. And I think, okay, wait a minute. Now, if I pass out, the next person home are my 3 daughters, who were considerably younger at the time. I said, I don't want them to find me on the floor, so I probably need to go to the hospital. Reluctantly, okay. So, and I start thinking, it could be a heart attack. And I just said to God, I said, I refuse to believe that you brought me through all this stuff to let it end here. I refuse. So I get in my car, and I have to throw out this disclaimer. I couldn't have got through any of this without them, just so you know, and just so I can go home this weekend. But I go and I get in my car, and I start driving myself to the hospital. I call my wife and I say, hey, I'm heading to the hospital. She says, what's wrong? I said, I don't know. I think I'm having a heart attack. And she goes, and you're driving? I was like, well, I got to get there somehow. So, and honestly, I thought the pain would go away and I would just never make it to the hospital. Pain would go away. I'd be fine because I am used to, look, I mean, I got the 1 in a trillion jaw, okay? I mean, I'm used to weird pain. So, but it didn't. It got worse and it got worse and it got worse. I get to the hospital. They take me in and they say initially everything's fine. The EKG came back normal. You're fine. We're going to keep you overnight for observation, do a stress test in the morning and send you home. I'm like, rock and roll. So I that night, a lab tech comes into my room and says, we made a mistake on your blood work. I need to take some more blood. I'm like, stab away, So about a half an hour, Julie was still at the hospital with me. She left right after the lab tech left. And then about 30 minutes later, a nurse walks in and she goes, Mr. Harding, we have canceled your stress test for the morning. The doctor will be here shortly. And when a nurse says the doctor will be here shortly, it means he might be there in 20 minutes or he might be there in like 10 hours. So take your pick. So it's like 10 o'clock at night, and she says, the doctor will be here to talk to you shortly, but they've canceled your stress test tomorrow. I said, okay. So I have all night to think about the possibilities. And what God reminds me is, I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And let me say this too, prosperity is not just financial. I think it was Paul who talks about, prosper as your soul prospers. Prosperity can be health. Prosperity can be any number of things. It's not just financial. And when you're clinging to life, and when you're going through a bunch of stuff, I'm not too worried about getting rich. I just want to know that I'm going to wake up the next day. So next morning, doctor comes in. He says, Mr. Harding, you definitely had a heart attack. So there is an ambulance, and I'm at our hospital that is actually near our church, near the office. And he says, there is an ambulance on its way to get you. And they're going to take you to the big hospital downtown, to the Heart Institute, at which point you will undergo a heart catheterization. If they can treat any blockages with stents, they will. Otherwise, you're going to have open heart surgery. Again, not what I was expecting to hear when I woke up this morning. So they take me to the hospital. I go in for the heart cath. They do the heart cath. 20 minutes later, the doctor walks out and talks to my wife and says, we can't find anything. He is clear. I mean, he's got a little bit of plaque, but nothing remotely that would cause a blockage, nothing. I mean, everything he has is normal. Completely normal. Well, at this point, I'm about 30 pounds overweight. So I decided when I got out of the hospital, I mean, there's this whole thing you got to do when you have a heart attack. And diet, exercise, the whole thing, which I hadn't exercised. I hadn't taken very good care of the temple, so I decided I'm going to do that. In a month and a half, I started working out religiously, watching what I eat, doing all this stuff, and within a month and a half, 2 months, I dropped from about 208 pounds to 178. I'm in the best shape I've been in years. I'm working out religiously. I'm doing all this stuff. This is in May of 2012. December 2012 rolls around. I get sick. And I go to the doctor and he says, I think your gallbladder is gone bad and we're going to probably have to remove it, but I'm going to have to send you for a scan at the hospital. I go for the scan the next day. I Leave the hospital, and I haven't eaten anything because you can't eat when you have those scans. So I leave the hospital. My wife drives me through a place. I get a drink. She says, I've got to go by the grocery store on the way home. She's going to just take me home. I got to go by the grocery store. I'm like, fine. So get to the grocery store. She goes inside. I'm sitting in the car. The phone rings. And it's the doctor's office. And they say, Mr. Harding, where are you? I said, on my way home. And he said, you need to get back to the hospital right now. You have acute appendicitis with a possible perforation. And I hung up the phone and I started laughing. And I just looked up and I said, God, I refuse to believe that you've brought me through all this stuff. It is not ending here. Because I know the plans I have for you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Future's the big thing right now. My wife comes out. I said, doctor's office just called. You got to take me back to the hospital. I have acute appendicitis. She goes, I just bought meat. Thanks, honey. I said, we'll figure it out. Just get me to the hospital. So we get back to the hospital. They take me in. They do the emergency appendectomy. Sure enough, my appendix had ruptured. And when your appendix ruptures, it's a really, really, really bad thing because you got all those toxins and they go all through your, and Ginger, what's that called when that happens? Yeah. And it gets, because I know Ginger, she's great. And, but it gets all in there and it can kill you. I mean, it's really, really, really bad. And the doctor comes in after my surgery and after I woke up and he says, well, your appendix had ruptured. And what happened was your appendix ruptured, all the toxins went out and formed a pocket right next to your appendix and stayed completely contained. Didn't go anywhere. And he said, I just went in, and it was like a little bulb. He said, I just went in, plucked it out, and we were done. He said, now we're going to keep you for observation because you could still have an infection. Well, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not harm you, plans to give you a hope in the future. So I'm going, okay, great, I get a 5-day vacation. Stay in the hospital. A few days later, I get out of the hospital. The doctor calls me and he goes, how you feeling? I said, hey, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. He goes, well, something I didn't tell you when you were in the hospital was when we removed your appendix, we also removed a carcinoid tumor, which was cancerous. Well, that puts me on the grid for cancer. And if any of you guys have ever been through that or have a family member that's been through that, that is a long, even just in a diagnosis means you're on the grid for at least 5 years. And every time they find something new, there's another doctor involved. So I'm going to an oncologist. At one point they find a spot in my lung. Then I'm at a pulmonologist, and that ended up being nothing. But I'm having to go visit this guy. He's having to keep tabs on me, and it's crazy. But they got the carcinoid tumor. It's gone. This is in December of 2012. In June of 2014, I start feeling bad, go to the doctor. He gives me some medicine, thinks it's one thing. I go to Greece to help lead worship at a conference in Greece. I come back, I'm home for a week, and then I have to fly to Nicaragua for a week. Okay, the whole time, not feeling great. Get back. My doctor says, well, the thing that I thought it was, it's not. I'm going to have to send you to somebody else, to another doctor. Sends me to the other doctor. He says, you have bladder cancer. So I start going through treatment for that, which is very unpleasant. But I know the plans I have for you. And I go through 2014. I switch doctors at the end of 2014. 2015 immediately start off with surgery, treatment, more surgery, more treatment. In the course of a year, I had gone through 5 surgeries. End of 2015, December, I go to visit my doctor for a physical. And he says, "You've got a cyst on your thyroid." Now, I'm still being treated for bladder cancer, okay? I've had this carcinoid tumor, which is completely unrelated to the bladder cancer. And doctor says, "You've got this cyst on your thyroid. We need to get it checked out." I go see a specialist. He goes, "With your track record," he goes, "normally I'd say just leave it and let's keep an eye on it." He said, "Your track record, we're taking it out." All right. So they take it out. Biopsy result, pathology report comes back. It's a malignant tumor. So now I have thyroid cancer. He says, "I really think we need to take your whole thyroid out." They take my thyroid out, pathology comes back. I have 4 more tumors in my thyroid, but nothing had spread anywhere. It hadn't gone to any lymph nodes. And through all of this, I'm just holding on to a promise that God gave me on a rainy day in advance. You say, "Well, that's great. Where are you going with all this?" A couple things. When God gives you a word, don't let yourself get derailed from that. Don't allow other voices to move you from the path that God has placed you on. And sometimes it's people that are well-meaning. You think, well, there's nothing, but if God has told you a specific, there's a story in 1 Kings 13 of this, and the Bible doesn't even name the guy. I mean, all it calls him is the man of God. And this guy goes, he faces down the king, faces down Jeroboam, and Jeroboam, tells his guards to arrest him. Jeroboam reaches out to point to him, and his arm withers up. Then the man of God heals him, and Jeroboam says, "Hey, come have dinner with me." And the guy says, "No, God has given me a specific word. I'm going to do that. I have to do that because God has given me this very specific word." And he leaves the presence of the king, and he goes, and he's doing what God tells him to do. Well, there's this old prophet in the land. And this old prophet hears about this guy. And so he gets on his donkey, and he goes and hunts him down. Runs him down. And he says, "Hey, come eat with me, come dine with me." And the man of God, again, no name, the man of God says, "Can't do that." Goes through the whole spiel again. Whole spiel he gave to Jeroboam. He says, "Can't do it. God's told me this. God's given me this specific instructions to do. I got to do all this stuff." And the old prophet says, "Oh, well, an angel showed up to me and told me you're supposed to come with me." The Bible says he was lying. And the man of God goes, "Oh, okay." And he just wanders off with the guy. And it cost him his life. He goes and he has dinner with the guy, and in the middle of dinner, the old prophet starts prophesying, who had lied to him previously, starts prophesying this word from the Lord and says, basically, when you leave here, you're a dead man. He leaves. He's riding a donkey. He gets attacked by a lion. And the Bible says, as other people passed by, they see the dead man of God laying in the road, and the donkey and the lion are standing there just looking at him. But the lion's not turning on the donkey, hasn't touched the donkey. I mean, how's that for a sign that you messed up? Whether it's well-meaning voices, because sometimes those well-meaning voices have their own motivations. And like Ray said, I'm a human. I might be wrong. So if it's something that God has told you, don't let yourself get derailed. Don't let yourself get derailed by circumstances. Most of all, don't let yourself get derailed by the voice of the enemy. Because when you're laying in your bed at night, when I'm laying in my hospital bed at night and I've got the enemy in my ear going, you're done. And the first urologist that I went to on the bladder cancer, the very first visit after I get he's already jumped to worst case scenario. I'm like, I don't need to hear this. Because I know the plans that God has for me, plans to prosper me and not harm me, plans to give me a hope and a future. So thanks for the advice, but I'm about to go find another doctor. Another thing, don't allow yourself to fall prey to a victim mentality. Jesus was the ultimate victim by the world's standards. He could have been the ultimate victim. Instead, but he refused to take on the mantle of a victim. He only took on the mantle of a victor. In the shadow of the cross, we completely lose our right to be a victim. I don't care what you've been through. I've told my testimony, you go, wow, that's some bad stuff. Somebody may be sitting out going, well, that's not as bad as me. And I understand that, okay? A friend of mine just recently went on a trip, got sick, almost died, spent like a month in the hospital. His medical bills at last telling were like over $500,000. So, and I'm sitting there looking at him going, man, that's bad, So it's all in your experience and where you are. But regardless of where you are, when you look at it in light of he who knew no sin, who became sin for us. All that stuff all our problems just kind of pale in comparison. Have God's perspective. The Bible says the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. It means when God called you to do that thing he called you to do, he was never going to be sorry he did it. When God called me to do the things that he called me to do, he saw the mistakes that I was going to make along the way. But he was never sorry that he did it. Because he knew the end from the beginning. He knew what I was going to do. He knew my successes and my failures. He's God. You can sit around in failure and feel sorry for yourself. We all can. But that's not what God's doing. God's not feeling sorry for us. He didn't call you to be a self-pitying wretch. A lot of us want to sing Amazing Grace and we want to stop at that saved a wretch like me. But there's so much more. And the song's about his amazing grace. Not waiting for the other shoe to drop. Not his amazing judgment. I could stand here, feel sorry for myself. I'm still going through treatment. I've been declared cancer-free, but I still have to go through all this treatment, and it is not fun. Man, it is not fun. When I get back from vacation, we've had a great vacation. We've traveled almost 2,000 miles. We've seen all kinds of cool stuff. And when I get back home, I get to go for treatment. Yay! I could feel sorry for myself, and I could stand up here and try to get you to feel sorry for me. And if that's what your takeaway is, then you've missed the point. Or I could stand here and I can declare to you that all this stuff that has happened to me over the past 33 years that began with the death of my father on June the 12th of 1983. Was so that on June the 12th of 2016, I'd be standing on this stage declaring the love and the faithfulness of Jesus. Because it was 33 years ago in about 6 hours, 6.5 hours, that my dad went to be with Jesus. So how do I do this? How do I talk about this stuff? You know, I'm mad at Brother Ron Phillips because there was a time when I wasn't very emotional, and he prayed over me one time, God, soften his heart, give him tears, you know. And now it's like I talk at this thing and I'm like breaking down, and it's like, yeah, thanks, you know. But you say, how do you do all this stuff? How do you do this stuff? How do you get through this stuff? Because 2 verses later in Jeremiah 29:13, it says, you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. Am I where I want to be? No. I go off the rails from time to time. Ask my family. Sometimes I get frustrated. But at the end of the day, that's where I want to be. To seek him and find him when we search for him with all of our heart. That means not holding anything back. So just to close, I just want to encourage you to go after him. Go after him with all your heart. Go after him 100%. Commit 100% of what you have and what you are to him. Because at the end of the day, this building, your house, your cars, your bank accounts, it's all going to be gone. And the only thing that's going to last is what we do for him. So seek him. Because he promises, if you seek, you'll find. That's a promise. It's not a nice thought. But we got to go after him with all that we are, 100%, not holding anything back. And it may mean we get laughed at, and it may mean that we lose friends over it. But in the end, it's all about him anyway. So thanks for having us out today, Pastor.